All right, let's get rolling. Thank you very much to everyone tonight for joining us with Michael Schulman, author of Oscar Wars. Couple of things beforehand, a couple little things. If you're a Dearborn Library card holder, please be sure to take part in our Oscar contest. You can win great prizes, some nice basket of candy, popcorn, and DVD copy of The Fablemans, and a couple passes to Imagine Theaters. And for those in the auditorium, I would highly recommend, we have copies of Michael's book on sale out in the lobby called Oscar Wars. It's a great book. So I want to introduce Michael. He's a writer living in New York City. His first book, Her Again, Becoming Meryl Streep, is about the actress's artistic coming of age in the 1970s. It was a New York Times bestseller. He's a staff writer at The New Yorker, where he's contributed since 2006 and written more than 100 Talk of the Town stories. He's written profiles on Bo Burnham, Elizabeth Moss, Pedro Almodovar, and more famously, Jeremy Strong. His work has also appeared in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, The Believer, Aperture, and other publications. So thank you very much, Michael, for joining us tonight.
Thanks. It's such a pleasure to be here, kind of, virtually be here.
Now, did you always, I like the Roger Deakins, the famous cinematographer. He and his wife have a podcast, and they always start off with this great question. Did you always want to become a journalist and writer when you were growing up, or did you want to take a different path?
No, I sort of fell into journalism. I was a theater kid growing up, so I did a lot of acting. And then in college, I directed plays. And then when I grew up in New York City, and when I moved back here after college, I had this vague idea that I was going to pursue directing, and then kind of didn't even know how to start. And around that same time, I got a job doing event planning for The New Yorker. And once I got there, I was obsessed with the idea of writing for the Talk of the Town section. So I just pursued that because those stories are like little one-act plays. They're not like hard news journalism. So I never went to journalism school. I basically just kind of got to The New Yorker, really wanted to write for the magazine, did more and more of that. And eventually that turned into writing longer profiles for them and writing books.
Well, what prompted you to write the Oscar Wars book?
Well, so I'm a longtime Oscar fan and aficionado, and I've been watching the ceremony since I was 11. And that's one answer. But really what got me to write this book was that in 2016 and 17, I was working on a long New Yorker piece about how the Academy was navigating Oscars So White and the controversy that it brought up. And I went out to Los Angeles and I interviewed the president of the Academy at the time, Cheryl Boone Isaacs, who was the first Black president, and wrote about how the Academy was trying to diversify its membership and how that had gotten all this backlash from other people in the industry. And it just seemed like it was this very complicated time in Academy history. And through writing that, I learned a lot more about the Academy's past, sort of why it existed, all this stuff about the organization. After that piece came out, I went to the Oscars to cover them in person for the first time for The New Yorker. And that was the year of the envelope mix-up with Moonlight and La La Land. So it was like this insane Hollywood twist ending after this long and complicated, contentious year. And to me, it just felt like this epic story about not just the Oscars, but about Hollywood and American culture and politics and, racial reckoning. And I felt like what I wanted to do for the book was write a book that wasn't every single year, but like about a dozen years that I could go really close in on, really deep dive, and sort of immerse the reader and look at years that told some larger story about change in the culture.
Well, yeah, maybe, uh, yeah, your book focuses on particular years, like you said, when there's change in the air, when there's great impact. And why don't we, yeah, we start with the two times where uh, there was great tumult in the Academy membership. In the 1970s with Gregory Peck, and then as a reflection with the Oscar So White hashtag in 2016. Now in 1970, Gregory Peck had wanted, there was a great sort of two but things were butting head against each other, the old Hollywood, the new Hollywood, and Gregory Peck, who was Academy president at the time, he had the foresight to say, hey, maybe we can update the Academy membership by transferring the kinds of membership that certain people, certain professionals, mostly PR professionals and executive professionals had to a non-voting status.
Yeah, so this was so fascinating. This was one of the things I stumbled on when I was writing that New Yorker story. You know, there was so much controversy in the air in 2016 about, you know, the Academy trying to bring in new people and sort of demote, you know, people who had been inactive in Hollywood to not, you know, emeritus status, as they called it. It was this great euphemism. And I realized that it had all happened before, in a sense, in 1970, when Gregory Peck came out with this plan to bring in members of the new Hollywood and essentially kick out people who had not worked in the industry for 7 years. And, you know, Hollywood had been very out of touch throughout the 60s with the, you know, the youth movement. And it was finally catching up by the end of the decade, but the Academy was even slower and more behind the times. And you had, you know, like you had Oliver winning Best Picture in 1969. I mean, this is 1969, you know, and this G-rated musical, Oliver, wins Best Picture. So Peck realized that he had to do something. And so he brought in people like Dennis Hopper and Dustin Hoffman and, you know, Jane Fonda, people who had been emblematic of that youth movement. And but he also sidelined, you know, he changed to non-voting status people who had been, you know, out of the industry, people who had worked in, you know, Abbott and Costello movies in the 30s. And when you go to his papers in the Academy Library in Beverly Hills, he saved all these angry letters that people sent him saying, how dare you kick me out? You know, how dare you do this? And I just loved that. You know, I found all these letters and I quoted a lot of them in the book, but it was such an echo of, you know, what was happening 50 years later.
Well, it's you detail how Candace Bergen in the book, how she volunteered to reach out or build bridges between the old Hollywood and new Hollywood.
That's right. I mean, this was just an incredible correspondence that I found in the Academy Library. So Candace Bergen, at the time, was a 22-year-old starlet and it girl. You know, she had been a model. She was in, you know, off in Europe making movies, and she watched the Oscars in 1969 and thought that there was no one her age on the screen, and it wasn't speaking to her generation. And so she wrote Gregory Peck and offered to recruit some of her cool, hip, young friends like Dennis Hopper. And he wrote her back and said, please go for it. And, you know, she was, of course, the daughter of Edgar Bergen, the ventriloquist. So she was sort of raised in old Hollywood, but she had this connection to the new Hollywood. So she was the perfect bridge from old to new.
Yeah, and then Cheryl Boone Isaacs, I think you have, I wrote down a quote from the book, used Gregory Peck's template for member to change up the membership reshaping of the membership, I should say. Quote, in the 60s and 70s, it was about recruiting younger members to stay vital and relevant, she wrote to the membership. In 2016, the mandate is inclusion of all facets, gender, race, ethnicity, yeah. So, thank you. Then sexual orientation, and I will add to that international membership, or people that aren't naturally based in Hollywood.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that's kind of underappreciated about what the Academy has done over the last 7 years. They've added a lot more international members, and I think you see that reflected in something like Parasite winning Best Picture. It was the first non-English film to win the top prize. Even this year, you have the German movie All Quiet on the Western Front. It's not just nominated for the Best International Feature Award, it's in the Best Picture race, and it has something like 9 nominations. So the Oscars have gotten much less confined by the geographical limits of Hollywood. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was a remarkable thing going back to the beginning of the Academy, and I think I read a quote of yours that it's this year's Academy Oscars is kind of like the first Academy because they're dealing with new technology. In the old times, it was sound recording. Now it's streaming. In other ways, what is a movie, or what can be considered a movie?
Absolutely. You know, right now, it's a very uncertain time in Hollywood because the streaming companies are kind of eating up theatrical distribution. People don't really go to movies anymore, except if it's a big Marvel movie or something, or Avatar or Top Gun. But it's really hard to get people out to cinemas to see an adult drama or an indie film. And so it's really shaken up people in Hollywood. They don't really know how to make money anymore with all those different genres. But what I learned doing the book is that Hollywood is always on moving ground. And year 1 of the Academy Awards was in 1929. And that was also an era of absolute upheaval where you had the talkies coming in and the silence going out. And that first year, they gave the jazz singer, of course, the major first talkie, they gave it an honorary award because they didn't feel like this movie even belonged in the same category as the nominees, which were all silent films. It was like clearly a new thing, a new category of movie, a new art form. And so the actual winners were all silent movies, but by the next year, the second Academy Awards, all the movies had sound. So it shows you just right from moment 1, the Academy Awards were capturing an industry in upheaval and chaos and evolution.
Well, yeah, I was reminded of the movie Singing in the Rain, when all the elocution, especially the lead actress, I forget her name, with her accent, distinctive accent, trying to learn elocution to be understood, the rain in the plane.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was a era where famously, the silent stars, many of them just could not make it in talkies because the public didn't like how they sounded, or they weren't trained for speech. I mean, some people did fine. Some people were, notoriously had their careers cut short. And the first Academy Awards happened right in the middle of that.
Well, yeah, I was quite taken with the detail that Louis B. Mayer came up with, the idea of the Academy over a game of solitaire.
Yes, this was one night at his beach house in Santa Monica, kind of after dinner drinks, and he had some associates over, these 3 friends of his, and he was playing solitaire in the corner, and they were all talking about how everyone in Hollywood was fighting with everyone else. The producers were fighting with the actors, the screenwriters were fighting with the executives, the directors, da, 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 da. And then Louis B. Mayer said, well, what we need is an organization that can help unify Hollywood. And that was the Academy.
And it fulfilled several, I mean, good functions to start. It helped people train in sound recording. It helped take care of contract issues, like Boris Karloff was stuck in Mexico once for a few days, and he didn't get paid for it, so he appealed to the Academy and they worked out the issue. But eventually that kind of function, especially negotiating contracts, kind of worked against the Academy and caused a lot of friction, especially after the Great Depression.
Yes, well, the Academy from the beginning was seen by a lot of the rank and file as a company union, essentially trying to prevent writers and actors and directors from organizing into labor unions. And so during the 30s, all these guilds popped up. They were created, like the Screen Actors Guild and the Screen Writers Guild, and they went to war with the Academy. They really felt like the Academy was the tool of the producers, and they actually would boycott the Academy Awards and tell their members to resign from the Academy because there was only room in town for one. So the way this got resolved after many years of discord was that the Academy president during the 30s was the director Frank Capra, and he loved the Academy Awards. He really wanted to win them, and then he won a bunch, and then he became the Academy president. And he said, well, if everyone hates us for meddling in economic matters and contracts and labor disputes, we're just not going to do that. We're just going to stop, because he wanted the Academy to survive. And so they basically shed all of those original functions that had to do with labor disputes and such. And what they kept was the Academy Awards, because everyone loved the Academy Awards. As soon as it existed, people wanted to win it. So that's how they kind of became the organization that gives out the awards. It certainly didn't start that way.
And Academy Awards meant a lot, as it did then, as it does now, to a person's career. I guess one example is who exactly wrote Citizen Kane, Orson Welles or Herman Mankiewicz? Yeah, there's beliefs on both sides.
Well, anyone who saw the recent movie Mank knows that it's a complicated tale, and it's been debated ever since the movie came out in 1941, who deserves credit for Citizen Kane. So famously, Citizen Kane lost every Academy Award on Oscar night in 1942, except one, which was for the screenplay, and it was shared by Orson Welles and Herman Mankiewicz. But that's a very uneasy pair, because by then they had fought over, who deserved the credit, who they had gone through arbitration with the Writers Guild, and it wound up being the only thing that the Academy rewarded the movie for, which is still remembered as one of the Academy's great mistakes.
Well, you make a great point towards the end of that chapter, where you say Orson Welles had all the luck before that, and then because he didn't get, well, he got the screenplay award, but essentially after that he had no luck in Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, if Citizen Kane had won Best Picture, it might have picked up at the box office, and more movies like it might have been made. Instead, Citizen Kane actually kind of faded for about 10 years, and it was rediscovered later on. And we now think of it as, one of the greatest movies ever made, if not the greatest movie. But it took a while for it to be recognized. And, I think it's fascinating to think about how movie history would have been different if it had won Best Picture.
Yeah. And then the rivalry between the sisters Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine got started then. got started at the
Oh,
ceremony.
that started from birth to hear them tell it. I mean, this was one of the most fun things to write about. So the same exact year Citizen Kane lost Best Picture, these two sisters who hated each other were both nominated for Best Actress, Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland. Each of them had lost the award previously. Olivia de Havilland, of course, is Melanie in Gone with the Wind. She had lost to her co-star Hattie McDaniel. And Joan Fontaine had lost the year before for Hitchcock's film Rebecca. But then in 1942, they were both nominated again. They were very competitive. Each wanted to be the first one to win the Oscar. And Joan won for another Hitchcock film, Suspicion. And it did not help. It did not help their rivalry at all.
Yeah, it continued on, shall we say. And speaking of actresses, we did a great chapter on the 1951 Oscar race. The stars of Sunset Boulevard, All About Eve, and Born Yesterday, they're all nominated. That's Gloria Swanson, Betty Davis, and Judy Holliday. And it is a great chapter on how I've learned a lot about, especially Judy Holliday, how she was affected by the blacklist, how Gloria Swanson had a great attitude despite all the setbacks in the life, and Betty Davis, it's always fun to read about her.
You know, she's always in a fight with someone. That's what makes her so fun.
Yeah, that how they had how Gloria Swanson was had a big comeback in Sunset Boulevard. She had originally been a silent movie actress, yeah, and then Betty Davis was she had a number of fighting a lot of contract issues with Warner Brothers, and then Judy Holliday pretty much came out of nowhere. She was the starlet at that time.
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about this book, I always wanted to do a chapter just on this one Best Actress race from 1951, because it just is amazing that they were all nominated against each other the same year. Some of the most iconic film performances in movie history. And so I really just wanted to tell the story of how each of them experienced making those movies and that year in their lives, and how they all collided at the Oscars that year. And you know, it's and who won? I mean, of those incredible performances, Judy Holliday actually won. And I think she's wonderful in Born Yesterday, but I think a lot of people would choose one of those choose Betty Davis in All About Eve, or Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah, sort of what they would call a career award. But the blacklist certainly had an effect on the Academy Awards, especially in the writers' races. The number of people like the writer of High Noon, Carl Foreman, Michael Wilson, and especially Dalton Trumbull. I mean, one year he wrote Friendly Persuasion.
That was Michael Wilson. Yeah.
Well, Michael Wilson. Yeah, how they just didn't credit him in the movie. They didn't give him a credit.
Well, yeah, so all sorts of crazy things happened during the blacklist because they couldn't acknowledge that these writers who had been accused of being communists or who had defied the congressional committee, you know, they were all working on the black market under fake names, but the movies couldn't acknowledge that they had written those screenplays. So when their screenplays that they'd secretly written started winning Academy Awards, that just caused all sorts of confusion and farce and, you know, these ridiculous outcomes. Like, you know, someone won an award in 1957 named Robert Rich, who it turns out didn't even exist. it was a made up guy, a name that was a front for Dalton Trumbo. So, and then the next year, the screenplay for The Bridge on the River Kwai won, and that had been credited to Pierre Boulle, the French writer who wrote the novel The Bridge on the River Kwai, except everyone knew he didn't really speak or write in English. So of course, that screenplay had also been written by blacklisted writers. And so really that part of the book just explores the lives of these three writers who had been put on the blacklist and won Academy Awards sort of in secret. And it took decades for the rightful, winners to be acknowledged.
Yeah, the Academy president, you had a photo in your Twitter feed the other day of Walter Murphy, who passed away, giving Dalton Trumbo his Oscar in 1975.
Yeah, 18 years after.
18 years later. But yeah, and I mean, again, like the prevalent theme throughout your book, how the awards kind of reflected the culture, like we mentioned earlier, how 1 year Oliver, a G-rated film, won Best Picture, and then Midnight Cowboy, so it started out an X-rated movie. One, they're like thunderheads clapping together. How the change comes so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you go from Oliver to Midnight Cowboy in 1 year. What happened in that year to cause that kind of major shift? So that was another year that I thought would be ripe for, going deep into and seeing how the counterculture finally caught up with the Oscars, or vice versa.
And then 1976 awards for you have a nice chapter, even though how the new Hollywood, it's always people want the power. People want to get the power, and they may be rascals and revolutionaries, but they still want to get the power. And how the 1 year where One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Nashville, and Dog Day Afternoon were on the Best Picture list, but essentially Jaws had the most impact of all.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that was another one, like the 1951 Best Actress race, that I just thought, look at these movies that were all up at the same year, all these classics at the same time. And what's fascinating about it is that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest won all the major awards that night, but Jaws sort of won this larger battle because it was the first major blockbuster. It kind of created this new model for the industry, and it kind of metaphorically ate up all those other movies like a shark, and launched the young Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, I just it was there's I mean, they're classic movies, well done movies, but it's like they've been overshadowed in a way by Jaws, by how much of an impact it had, like the summer tentpole model that it's always been in the future. I mean, I wasn't a great swimmer, so my mom didn't want me to see it in the theater. But it's a good movie. And I was kind of touched by. I looked at the other day at the opening to the 1989 Oscars, and it was interesting. I mean, I don't remember seeing it, but it was interesting. But it was well, the name of your chapter is Fiasco, but it seemed different.
Yeah. I mean, the 1989 Oscars they went down in history as the worst Oscars ever. And famously or infamously, they opened with an 11-minute opening number that included Rob Lowe singing Proud Mary with Snow White in a replica of the Coconut Grove with dancing cocktail tables. And it's just this insane, campy, over-the-top production number. But I really wanted to take a closer look at it. And what I found was that it's actually the story of a man named Alan Carr, who was a very flamboyant gay movie producer, remembered for his incredible collection of caftans. And he wanted his whole life to produce the Oscars. And when he finally got the chance, it was this flaming fiasco. And he was essentially ostracized. And it ruined his life. You know, it certainly ruined his career, but in a way, it also ruined his life. And so I felt that in a way, it was like an Icarus story of someone flying too close to the sun. And, you know, I don't think that, you know, the opening number is bad, but, you know, there's been plenty of bad if you watch, especially opening numbers of the 80s. So I sort of wanted to redeem him a little bit, or at least make you think a little bit deeper about this award ceremony that's become a real joke, the 1989 awards.
Humanize them. I mean, you saw I felt the humanity in him, that you wanted the best. He had an idea, and it just didn't work out. But probably in one chapter you have it's called the Harveys. It's a great reflection of how it's almost like a political campaign now. I mean, you need, and that's what kind of surprised people by Andrea Riseborough's nomination, how it just seemed to come out of nowhere, because there's a great infrastructure to the awards. There's consultants, there's advisors. I mean, there's people, it's a whole way people make a lot of money now. And to have and you described this in the chapter with how Shakespeare, battle between Shakespeare in Love and Saving Private Ryan, how it got started.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of can't write an Oscar history without grappling with Harvey Weinstein. And what he used to be notorious for, before he was notorious for what he is now, was being very aggressive about Oscar campaigning. And this was throughout the 90s when he and his brother ran Miramax, but it really culminated in this very ugly battle between Shakespeare in Love and Saving Private Ryan, where Spielberg released Saving Private Ryan in the summer of 1998. It was sort of presumed to be the front runner for Best Picture. And then along came Shakespeare in Love in December, and suddenly there was a real fight. And, you know, Weinstein would leave no stone unturned in his campaigning. And it got so ugly that, you know, on Oscar night, when Shakespeare in Love actually managed to win, people in the industry were aghast because they thought basically he had stolen something. I think in reality, there are a lot of legitimate reasons why people voted for Shakespeare in Love, but it was seen as, you know, Harvey bullying people and, you know, doing things he shouldn't have done. But then once that happened, every studio decided they needed to play the Weinstein playbook and not let him take their Oscars again. So that's how this cottage industry grew, because suddenly every studio said, okay, we need a handful of consultants, and we need to blanket the trade magazines with ads, and we need to do this, this, and that. And that's how we got the modern Oscar season.
Yeah, I mean, I remember they would have stars go out to the senior home, the motion picture senior home, to shake hands. You go to screenings and you can shake people's hands. It's just like a political campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of parallels between Oscar campaigning now and presidential campaigning. I mean, you sort of have the primary states meaning like the Golden Globes and the BAFTA awards and the SAG awards, instead of, you know, trying to win Iowa and New Hampshire.
You know, but winning the awards isn't always a great thing. Just you have a nice chapter called Tokens, how you talk about the careers of Hattie McDaniel, Sidney Poitier, and Halle Berry. How winning the awards doesn't necessarily is a positive thing. I mean, yes, Sidney Poitier, for example, he went on to directing and had a firm career, had a nice career, but he never really got his leading man status back. Halle Berry didn't really couldn't find the roles or couldn't get the roles she deserved, and same thing with Hattie McDaniel, one for Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, so these were three actors across the span of a century who won these historic awards, where they were the first Black actor to win in whatever category they won in. And what was amazing to me is how many parallels there were with the three of them. You know, in each of those cases, these were historic wins that were memorialized and remembered and praised, and sort of represented a moment for the industry to show that it was progressing, and projecting an aura of racial equality. But for the person who actually won that award, it was a very isolating and fraught experience. And each of them had sort of a bumpy patch of their career right after that happened. You know, Halle Berry, after she went from Monsters Ball, she did Catwoman, which was a notorious flop. And Sidney Poitier won for Lilies of the Field. And then a few years later, he was in In the Heat of the Night, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and wasn't nominated for either of them. And then quickly became criticized for being too wholesome, being too upstanding. And as soon as the era of blaxploitation came along, like Shaft and Superfly, he was almost instantly out of date and all but disappeared from the screen.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a positive thing when you win the award. But I want to get your eyewitness accounts, especially with like we started off with the mix-up with the envelopes between La La Land and Moonlight, and being there in the auditorium when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock.
Yep, I was at both of those, amazingly. They were both really crazy. Yeah, I mean, just it's one thing to be at the Oscars, it's really exciting. But if you're there one of those years where something completely unpredictable and nuts happens, it's a whole other ballgame. And I was there as a reporter, so I had to run around and try to figure out what people were saying, what was happening. You know, with the slap last year, I was way up in the balcony and I could barely see anything, but I could hear Will Smith screaming. And I thought, okay, this is real. He sounds very angry, and you cannot say that the F word on ABC. So, you know, the whole air in the room changed. You know, it was like, you know, everything sort of felt a little dangerous and unpredictable. And I ended that night going to the Vanity Fair party, and I saw him dancing on the dance floor with his Oscar in his hand, smiling this huge smile. The DJ turned on Getting Jiggy With It, which was, of course, his big hit from the 90s. And he started rapping along to himself, smiling, dancing. It was this very surreal image. And I kind of was looking for a new way to end the book, because I had just turned in my first draft to my editor and realized that I had to somehow work in the slap, because I knew it would be one of those moments that people always remembered about the Oscars.
And for the mix-up between La La Land and Moonlight, how did the confusion felt in the room, or how it's like what was the kinds of reaction that was in the room, or that you felt, that your take on it?
Yeah, well, so I was in the press room that year, which is, it's not in the auditorium, it's on a hotel that's basically connected to the theater. And so you're in this room, it's like a hotel conference room or something. Not a conference room, like a convention room. And there are tons of long tables and about 100 journalists, and they bring in the winners to meet the press after they win. And so I was there when the envelope mix-up was revealed, and when you saw on screen the producer holding up the card that said Moonlight, everyone screamed. People were not used to something that crazy happening at the Oscars. And the rest of the night, I just ran around to parties, interviewed people. Everyone had a different theory about what happened. There was this kind of electricity the whole evening.
Okay. And then what, after this book took four years to write?
Yep.
What was the hard part, I guess, or what did you find the hardest about it?
I think the hard thing was just sticking with it. Anything that takes 4 years, you have many long nights of staying up thinking, am I ever going to finish this thing? And I have another job at the New Yorker, which keeps me very busy as a staff writer. So it was really hard to balance these two projects, or two jobs, like this project that was very slow and took a lot of time. And I didn't see the fruits of it until basically now. And then my job at the New Yorker, where there's, something due every week or every other week. And I think that was the hard part, really just doing both things at once, trying to think in this long-term way, and then in a shorter-term way with my other job.
No, as a librarian, I would be, well, okay, I'm interested. What kind of research places that you went to research for the book?
Well, for the older time periods, especially, I did a lot of research in libraries and archives. So the Academy has its own library, the Margaret Herrick Library in LA. And I spent a lot of time there until the shutdown, when it became a lot harder. And I had to get the librarians to look up things for me and scan things. And then here in New York City, I went quite a lot to the Library of Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. And they have some great stuff too. And I would look at old letters, correspondence, stuff like the Candace Bergen letters with Gregory Peck, and old issues of Variety, and old movie magazines that don't even exist anymore. And I was helped by a lot of great librarians and archivists, because as soon as the pandemic hit, these libraries were closed to visitors. So essentially you had to ask the librarians there to look up things for you and find things. In some cases, scan entire chapters of books. For Joan Fontaine's autobiography, I couldn't go look at it. So I had to ask the librarian, can you find whatever she says about the Oscars and scan it for me? Or can you find whatever she says about her sister? And he ended up scanning half the book for me. So a lot of the joy of research in archives is not knowing exactly what you're looking for and then stumbling upon something. And that was much harder when I couldn't actually physically go there and had to have the staff help me. But they were great. I mean, it was a much more difficult thing.
Yeah, I get you. I mean, for me, the research, the finding things is the fun part. So finally, you immersed yourself in all this Academy history. What do you take as challenges that the Academy has to deal with in the future?
Well, right now, the Academy is really facing a crisis of relevance. The ratings are going down, and there's this question do we even care about Academy Awards? Why should we pay attention? The kinds of movies that usually are very popular and also win Academy Awards are sort of disappearing. Those mid-budget studio dramas. And so I don't know. Once again, the industry is in a lot of flux. And I think it's sort of an open question. Are the Academy Awards going to exist for another century? They're now 95. They're approaching their 100th anniversary. And, you know, will movies exist? I think it's a really open question. And, you know, people always talk about how they should change the ceremony, make it shorter, make it cooler, whatever. I don't think any of that will solve this problem. I think it's a much bigger issue of kind of the role that movies play in our culture. It's so different now than it was even 30 years ago. So I don't know. I sort of wondered writing this book, you know, there are times when a crisis in the entertainment industry produces a whole new movement of creativity, the way it did in the 70s with the new Hollywood, or in the 30s with the arrival of talkies. And so I think it's possible that now, with so much changing, it might show us some, you know, we might get some like wonderful new movies out of it. And we might not. I mean, I sort of was wondering as I was wrapping up the book, is this the history of something that is on some level ending? And I think we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, agreed. So thank you very much. So we'll move on to the Q&A part. Those people online, feel free to, in the Q&A section at the bottom, you can go ahead and type in your question. Right now, I'll see if people here in the auditorium have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes people get Oscars and it's for their overall work. In point that Paul Newman got the Oscar for Color of Money, and I could probably name 5 Paul Newman movies where he should have gotten the Oscar from. And he's in a movie with Tom Cruise, so it's kind of, you know, Tom Cruise is going to be the star of the movie. And then also, other thing is 2 people have turned down their Oscars. George C. Scott and then
Marlon Brando.
even though the first one he accepted for On the Water. What's your take on those 2, and then also about people getting it for kind of
Career awards? Yeah.
Career awards are kind of they have always happened. I mean, in the second Academy Awards in 1930, Mary Pickford won Best Actress for her first talkie, a movie called Coquette, which everyone thought she was terrible in. But she was Mary Pickford. She was the most famous woman in Hollywood, and people felt, and she was very instrumental in the early Academy. And so she won. And for years afterward, people speculated that she had invited the Academy judges over for tea at Pickfair, because how could she have possibly won for that? It's certainly not her best role. So I think you see that all the way going up to this year. There's a lot of momentum behind Angela Bassett, for instance, for Best Supporting Actress for Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and also for Jamie Lee Curtis in that category for Everything Everywhere All at Once. But I think what people really want to do is reward them for some of their earlier, the scope of their careers. You know, Angela Bassett famously lost the Oscar for What's Love Got to Do with It in the 90s. And Jamie Lee Curtis, you know, probably should have won for, you know, Fish Called Wanda or something. So yeah, that's always that started as soon as the Oscars started, and it's still happening. And then the 2 actors you mentioned who declined the Oscar, that's a really interesting period, because I think a lot of interesting things happened in the 70s with the Oscars, and part of it was that it was a very anti-authoritarian time. You know, you think of Nixon, like you think of just Vietnam, like it was a very fraught time in American history, and people didn't put as much stock in, you know, the lofty Academy Awards, the establishment. So I think that those 2 things are related.
Okay. Now, looking at the questions from the Q&A online, let's see. Got a couple questions like who do you think will win certain categories? Like Kate Blanchett or Michelle Yeoh, who would win Best Picture. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Oh, do I press answer live?
No, you can just answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle Yeoh or Kate Blanchett. I have no idea. That's one of the ones I'm most curious about this year. And I like a tight Oscar race because it makes it more suspenseful. I really have no idea which one of those two is going to win. It probably is, it certainly is going to be one of those two, but I couldn't tell you which one. I mean, and I'm a fan of both of them. I loved Tar. I think there's a lot of momentum behind Everything Everywhere right now, and that might carry Michelle Yeoh across that finish line. But people also might think, well, maybe this is our chance to award Tar if Everything Everywhere is getting all these other awards. I don't think we're going to know until that very moment when someone wins.
Okay. Yeah, question here in the auditorium.
Yes, thank you very much for your very insightful comments and also for all your good work you've been doing. My question has to do with simply the mechanics. Can you give us a little behind the curtain insight as to how are the ballots made? Are they're simply saying, I vote for X or Y? Is there commentary behind it? What do they deal with? How do they deal with some ties? And are the individuals themselves revealed, making them open for possible, let's say, campaigning? How do they maintain, let's say, their integrity to avoid being, let's say, accosted with individuals who would like to have their vote?
Yeah, did you get that question?
Yeah. Well, so there's it's an anonymous ballot for the people in the Academy, and most of them are yes. You just pick the one you want to win, except for Best Picture, which is a ranked choice ballot, which means you rank them, 1 to 10. And that is a very complicated system. I'm not as good enough in math to explain how that actually works. But I mean, essentially, part of it is that the nominee that gets the least number 1 votes then gets tossed out, and those number 2s, whoever voted for that, their number 2s get added to the top. So when people speculate about what might win Best Picture, they have to think about, well, okay, which is least likely to get votes, and what would those people count as their number 2, et cetera. And then there's this crazy map that goes into the Best Picture award. The other categories are more straightforward. And what was the second part of the question about people getting accosted, something?
Maintaining the integrity of the process so that individuals cannot be influenced by.
Right. Well, I mean, there are a lot of guidelines that the Academy uses to sort of police Oscar season. And for instance, like you can't throw a big reception unless you also have a screening of the movie. And that was put in place, for instance, to prevent all this money being spent on just parties. But there's, even then, there is a ton of influence. And we see with the Andrea Riseborough surprise nomination this year, no one had even heard of that movie before the Oscar nominating window, when suddenly all these A-list celebrities were posting on social media about her. Don't count out Andrea Riseborough and To Leslie, be sure to watch it. And it actually worked. She actually got a nomination. So I think that's an example of how there is an influence campaign, and it's really not some kind of pure measure of who had the best performance. I mean, there is no pure measure because it's art. So, it's not like a sports team. And I think people are there, there's a lot of money and effort behind trying to get people to pay attention to certain movies.
Okay. So let's take a list here. Look at the list. Let's see. What are some of your favorite Oscar-winning movies of all time, Michael?
Let's see. I love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's partly why I wanted to write that chapter. I love All About Eve. That's why I wanted to write that chapter. And a more modern one, I think, would be Moonlight.
Yeah, I loved how you talked about All About Eve. Essentially, it was kind of a true story.
Yeah, I know. It was actually based on an actress with a crazy fan who insinuated herself into her life.
Okay, then let's do one more question. Let's see here. Who do you think is the most overlooked actress working today? And do you respect lifetime Oscars, like the governor's awards or the special awards, like with Samuel Jackson, Donald Sutherland, that type of thing? Do you respect those, or do you think, what is your take on that?
The most overlooked actress still working today. I mean, like in general, I mean, I have personal favorites. Like I love Lisa Kudrow and I love Parker Posey, and I sort of feel like I feel like any moment we're going to get the resurgence of one of them. And I think that Lisa Kudrow is so brilliant, and I think she has an Oscar-winning role in her career. I hope. In terms of Academy Award-winning actresses, I mean, obviously Glenn Close is the perennial loser, and
Yeah.
I mean, that is just become an uncomfortable situation at this point. I wouldn't say she's overlooked in general. She still is working and doing well, and she's had an incredible career. But yikes, the woman cannot win an Oscar to save her life. And then in terms of the Lifetime Oscars, I think they're great. I mean, I sort of wish they were still on the main show.
Yeah.
You look back in Oscar history, for instance, that 1970 Oscars, they gave the Lifetime Award to Cary Grant. And it was this very emotional moment when he came out and was acknowledged by, all of his peers. And you sort of saw the older, grayer, but still charming and handsome and charismatic Cary Grant kind of give up a speech summing up his career. And I just think those moments are great. And I kind of don't understand why the Academy has relegated them to, an untelevised previous award show. I think they really help ground the ceremony in some gravitas.
Yeah, like with Charlie Chaplin when he
Yeah.
got his Oscar, but now it's essentially a stop on the campaign trail. I too would love to see that ceremony, because these people do remarkable work and have it celebrated.
Yeah, and when you see those awards given at the Golden Globes, they're always very emotional and moving. So I don't quite understand why the Oscars aren't doing that.
So, okay, well, thank you very much, Michael. It's almost an hour, so I want to thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight. It was a real pleasure, and I enjoyed it, and I think everyone enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much. It was really quite an honor to be asked to do this, and hopefully I'll make it to the Dearborn Library sometime in person as well.
Very good. So I want to encourage people. We have his book for sale out in the lobby, and if you don't get it there, plenty of places to get it. It's a good read. So thanks a lot, Michael.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who came tonight. It's been a pleasure. Bye.